Good morning, everyone. I can see the numbers are growing, and let me start by acknowledging that here in Melbourne, those of us who are joining from Melbourne are on the land of the Kulin people of the Kulin Nations, and I acknowledge their elders, past and present. I acknowledge also our special guest, Craig Jukes, is joining us on the land of the Ngunnawal people, I would imagine, and he'll let us know if he's meeting if he's somewhere else other than the land of the Ngunnawal. But that is the people who are the traditional owners of Canberra. And so I also want to pay my respects to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. And I acknowledge that around the country, although COVID is interrupting a lot of the NAIDOC week celebrations, I acknowledge that around the country, a lot of our Melbourne communities are still out participating in NAIDOC week activities and in events, and that these days can be very significant for our mob. These weeks are very significant for our mob, and it's a great celebration of everybody who are travelling around the country to be able to, get engaged and be supportive of the events that are happening across the communities. I'm Jessica Ralston. I'm Pro Vice Chancellor and Head of the William Cooper Institute. And I'm just going to get us kicked off a little bit this morning before I hand over to the facilitator of the panel. Let me start by talking a little bit about NAIDOC Week and this NAIDOC celebration that we have across the country. In fact, this week, National Aboriginal Islander Day of Commemoration, is how it has ended up coming to what we know now. Started off actually because of the work of people like William Cooper and his contemporaries here in Melbourne back in the 1930s and 40s through the Aboriginal Progressives Association and the Aboriginal Advancement League. They, as a group collectively, were standing up asking Australia as a community to not celebrate Australia Day in the way that we all have been celebrating it. This is back in 1937, and that was the first call for that Australia Day event to be recognised as something other than a recognition of celebration, but as a day of mourning. And over the years of advocacy through William Cooper, Aboriginal Advancement League and the Aboriginal Progressives Association, we ended up with a day that was a national Aboriginal and Islander Day of celebration, the first Sunday of July, that from about the mid-1950s, I think, might have been a little bit later, became this sort of celebration of what now has evolved into a very large celebration across the country and very much recognised within Indigenous communities as well as non-Indigenous communities, corporations and commercial sectors. Every year, NAIDOC is set with a theme. And if you're interested in those themes, you could go online to the NAIDOC website. You'd be able to see the posters and the themes from previous years. But this year's theme, quite significantly for our communities, is titled Heal Country. And today I really do welcome the opportunity to do, in partnership with the Faculty of IT, this forum to think about how IT as a discipline and as a sector and as an industry can help contribute to changing voices and the work that goes on around the country in the IT industry. And so you'll hear today from this panel about this and about some of the work that we have to do. Let's first introduce the panel. So joining us is Jamil Tai, who's Director of the William Cooper's Indigenous Student Services Program Team, Craig Jukes, who is Managing Director of Gananga, an IT company based in Canberra, and both Jamil and Craig, as Aboriginal men, will bring to this panel today very important sort of voices of Indigenous people in the way that we engage health workforces and sectors in business, and the work that we're trying to do through the Indigenous higher education space. Also joining us today, and I'm very pleased to have Professor Anne Nicholson, the Dean of the Faculty of IT, and most importantly, to have joining us today is Emeritus Professor Susan Mccamish. And I say most importantly because a lot of work that's already been going on here at the Faculty of IT at Monash in this space of the Indigenous space has really been led from the work that Professor Mccamish has been doing throughout her career. I know you will have seen the bios on the promotion of this event, but please do look in detail for them. I think the importance of being able to have the voices of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people here today in these conversations is really critical to moving forward. I'd also like to introduce to those who haven't met him yet, Joseph Tai, who is again another Aboriginal man, Yorta Yorta man, and Program Manager for Events, Engagement and Employment, something like that. I might have given him another piece in his title, which he'll tell me about later. But Joseph is going to facilitate for us this panel discussion today. And I'm really looking forward to being able to stay on for a little while with you all and hear the conversations and learn a little bit more and get the insight from this panel about what we can do to help strengthen Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's engagement in the IT sector, but also strengthen the engagement of the IT sector with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities, which is equally as much of the agenda, I think, as the first. So I'll hand over to Joseph. There may be some housekeeping that I've forgotten, but he'll pick it up for me. And I hope you all enjoyed this conversation today.
Thank you very much for that introduction there, Jacinta. Really, really useful context setting. So as Jacinta rightly pointed out, so I'm the Program Manager of Indigenous Employment, Community Engagement. Proud Yorta Yorta Willithka man, and I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm zooming from today, and the peoples of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to elders past and present and all mob that are on the webinar today. I'll take a bit more of a passive approach. Whilst Jacinta isn't able to join us for the whole panel discussion, she's been gracious enough to share her thoughts and sort of help us steer the discussion in her absence. So without further ado, I'll throw to Professor Mccamish, if that's okay. Professor Mccamish, I understand you've led the development of the Faculty of IT Indigenous Strategy and Implementation Plan 2021 to 2023. Could you please tell us a bit about the plan's development and its key focuses?
Yes, thank you, Joseph. And I too would like to acknowledge that I'm joining the webinar from the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So the FIT Indigenous Strategy was developed in partnership with the William Cooper Institute, with Indigenous colleagues across Monash and with the wider Indigenous community. And it's drawn heavily on respectful educational and research relationships and partners that we've been developing over the years with Indigenous communities. It's been very important for us to listen and to learn and to ask Indigenous communities, colleagues and elders, what is a respectful way for our faculty to engage with them and to contribute the expertise of our educators and researchers to address their needs. We're also conscious of acknowledging and addressing the harmful impact that Western-style education research has often had, and recognising the role that universities have played in perpetuating colonial structures and the dominance of Western style education and research and worldviews. I've recently found the poetry of Amberlyn Kwemulina, who is from the Pilbara region, and she speaks about genuine allies of Indigenous peoples as being change makers who understand that colonisers occupy space and decolonisers yield space. And so in developing the strategy, we've been guided by that way of thinking and doing. The strategy itself focuses on creating culturally safe places, and that includes things like, of course, acknowledgements of country, the naming of rooms and buildings, artwork, all very important aspects of that. And also thinking more deeply about creating culturally safe places that recognise that we live in this multiverse that encompasses different worldviews and ways of knowing and thinking and knowledge structures, and that therefore creating culturally safe places does involve changing existing academic cultures to embrace that multiverse, including, particularly in relation to this strategy, Indigenous ways of knowing, knowledge structures, worldviews, and knowledge transmission, which has occurred over millennia. We're giving high priority to recruiting an Indigenous associate dean and academics and professional staff to lead our program, and to working out how best then the rest of us in the faculty can support and work with them. We also look to partner with traditional owners and Indigenous communities to seed Indigenous curriculum relating to knowledge and culture across all our degrees. And in the future, one of the things I'm thinking we might like to do is to look at developing a degree, possibly at master's level, on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge structures, systems and transmission. And that might be an appropriate way to go in our curriculum development. We've worked very closely with the William Cooper Institute on our strategy. We've listened to and learnt from Indigenous colleagues and partners. We've introduced new pathways, scholarships and opportunities for industry engagement, particularly through work placement. We've set up seed grants to encourage partnership research. And we are also conscious, as I mentioned earlier, of engaging in truth-telling about IT itself and who it currently benefits and the harms that it can also do. And just as an example, since invasion, data has been weaponised against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and Indigenous environments that can be amplified where there is the use of data profiling in deficit detrimental ways, failing to address issues of consent and representation, and that amplifies the bias and discrimination. And this is particularly critical given that so many policies, including intervention policies, are built on that data. So we're also conscious that as IT researchers and educators, we need to address the harmful as well as the really positive impacts in relation to IT research and education. And that really does link so closely to the healing theme of this year's NAIDOC week.
Thank you very much, Professor Mccamish. It's really important insights you share there. You're really pointing around the occupying and yielding of space. I think that's, that's a really sort of poignant message for a lot of engagement that occurs across a range of disciplines, fields, industries. So it sounds like the Faculty of IT is doing some, wonderful work, especially embodied in that strategy. Which brings me to my next question, directed towards Professor Nicholson. Professor, you were recently appointed in 2020 as the Dean of the Faculty of IT. Could you please tell us about your Indigenous vision and priorities for the Faculty of IT?
Well, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that our faculty, which has just finished, it had its 30-year anniversary, really hasn't had strong links with Indigenous communities, other than a few good exceptional pockets, and hasn't had a strong representation within its community of either students or staff from Indigenous backgrounds. So what that means is that we're really, and I think that reflects probably, and Craig can talk a bit more about this later, about really in the IT workforce, that there's not obviously a strong Indigenous presence. And what that means is that we're really starting from a fairly low base of engagement and representation. And so when you talk about my vision, I guess, in a very general terms, I want IT to be seen as a potentially attractive career for students and a pathway. I want it to and us to be seen as partners, and in the form that Sue had talked about, for really taking the positive aspects and potential of IT, and which we've seen in the last year in particular, the fact that we're running this webinar online, that telehealth thing is online, people are learning online, so IT now is that really foundational part of our society, our business, our government. So we want that to be something that Indigenous community is a part of, are leaders in, that are utilising for the benefit of Indigenous community, and of course for participating in general Australian community in exactly the same way as they should be in all other spheres. So we're behind in this if you compare us to other discipline areas. In that sense, we're probably behind where the teaching professions and law and medicine and social work and so on, they're probably at this place 30 years ago. So we've got a long way to go. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that we're just starting. I think that we need to partner and share and listen, and through opportunities such as this is a really good example of what we need to be doing. And then, my vision is I think it will take 10 plus years. We don't go from such a low base to vibrant, active, high levels of participation and engagement. But I would like to think that in 10 or 20 years that we at Monash, in our unique faculty of IT, are seen as the national leaders in developing and promoting Indigenous IT workforce, outreach to students, collaboration with in our research with Indigenous communities to get that benefit there. I want us to be the leaders, and we have to work hard to get there, and we have to work in partnership to make sure we put all the right things in place. So I guess that's sort of my vision, and we've got the plan. We've got a lot of pieces of it. It's going to be a matter of prioritising. We also know that we're in really tight budget times right now, so it is hard to find money for new initiatives. But from my point of view, that this is a crucially important one, and we're probably, pity we weren't here 20 years ago, but we weren't, and now we have to all come together and progress that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Professor. And better late than never. So it sounds like there's some really really active stuff happening in the space there. So really good to hear. With talking about what you when you mentioned partnerships and whatnot, I think a key part of that probably leads into next panelist Jamil Tai, who is of course the Director of Indigenous Student Services within the William Cooper Institute. So, Jamil, if I could please start to you. You're centrally leading the work to recruit Indigenous students for Monash. Given what we've just heard from Professor Mccamish and Professor Nicholson about the faculty's aspirations and importance of increasing participation of Indigenous people engaged in the IT workforce, could you please tell us what you believe are the barriers for Indigenous students in school aspiring to IT as a career pathway? And how can your Indigenous student recruitment program work to address those barriers?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Joe. And just before I start, I'd also like to acknowledge traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging from all the lands in which we're signing in from. I think there was actually a number of really key points that were touched on there by Professor Nicholson and Professor Mccamish, just around some of the barriers that do exist. And look, to take it, I guess, one step further and to put a specific lens on it from my role, which is, in the Indigenous recruitment space, I think there's not been a lot of engagement in the early secondary school years with Indigenous learners. I think that's probably where it needs to start. And I've heard it mentioned a few times this week, but you can't be what you can't see. And a lot of our students are first in family and, that come to university. So there's not a role model or something, a community or their family that they can look up to that's in the field of IT. So I think that's a big thing. That is like Professor Nichols has said, is going to take time to, we can start to put the things in place now, but it's actually going to be, a few years down the track before we start to see some traction in numbers. But I think, that's not to say that there's not some good work that's already started off, but I think that will be important to get the numbers heading in the right direction. The other thing is that I get asked this quite a lot by our current students and even prospective students is when they're, putting their VTAC preferences in, they sort of ask me, what job am I going to get at the end of this study? It's a really big thing for us. And I think if you look at across where the bulk of our Indigenous enrolments are, they're across the fields of, health, and there's some in arts and, growing numbers in law and this sort of stuff. But I think it's really clear how those roles could sort of serve community post-graduation. And that's a big thing for our students as well, especially if they've come from community. They wanted to know, okay, if I'm a nurse, I could go out and work with community. I can help, provide a culturally safe service for my people. And I think that's probably a piece of work that we need to grow in IT. I think the perception, for better or worse, has been that IT, when you speak to students, isn't that just sitting behind a desk fixing service desk problems, and that doesn't really interest me, and how's that going to help community? So I think there's a piece of work to do there as well, and that obviously has started last year. We Professor Mccamish mentioned it, that we sort of worked on the IT's Indigenous strategy, and there's some showcasing of some work that's gone on with community. But I think that's another piece that needs to happen. I think as a university, we've put some really good things in place over the, since Professor Jacinta Allison started. One of those things was amending the admissions policy at Monash, so we could be a little bit more inclusive in the way that we bring Indigenous applicants into the university. So ATAR and study score requirements aren't necessarily a barrier anymore, given that we've got a specific group that sort of has oversight over those candidates. But also utilising our access pathways, such as like the Monash Indigenous Access Program, where gives you sort of a strong base to get into uni. If you haven't studied for a while, I think we can sort of start to grow the awareness of those types of programs as well, if we're going to encourage people in. But I guess those are probably the main things. And like I said, Professor Nicholson and Professor Mccamish did cover up on a few of the really topical things earlier as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for those insights, Jamil, and a really important point, and I'm sure it'll be a common theme throughout this this sort of panel discussion is you can't be what you can't see, and sort of how we get that representation headed in the right direction to really create those role models for our students, which sort of brings me to our next panelist, so our guest panelist for today, so Craig Jukes. Craig, in your impressive professional background, you've been the CEO of two separate organisations that have been critical influences in the development of Indigenous workforce groups in health. These have been obviously through the Australian Indigenous Doctors Association and Indigenous Allied Health Australia. So drawing from those experiences, what lessons do you think can be drawn from looking at the successes that have been seen in growing the numbers of Indigenous people working in the healthcare professionals in terms of applying it to, the information technology industry?
Some of the challenges involved in that, or some of the lessons learned, and some of the positives that I take out of my career in working in Indigenous health was that it was always good to develop really good, strong partnerships with different organisations. And I think the success of Indigenous Allied Health Australia and the Australian Indigenous Doctors Association was around building those networks of people, building relationships with different organisations. With Allied Health, it's more around getting in front of the Allied Health professional associations who, when I was CEO of Indigenous Allied Health Australia, there wasn't really much happening in that area in terms of relationships with Indigenous allied health professionals or people trying to get Indigenous people into allied health professions. I think the same is true with the Australian Indigenous Doctors Association. I spent a lot of time with universities, particularly medical schools, developing relationships with them and looking at, I guess, the support that they were giving Indigenous students, what sort of safe places they had, Indigenous perspectives in the curriculum, those types of things. They were really important, but it was also working with the medical colleges, the specialist medical colleges, and getting more people into the specialist programs. I had a lot of people going into general practice and rural and remote medicine, but we're now starting to see more people getting into the specialist professions like psychiatry. We've just had another person go into vascular surgery. He'll be the first one into their training program. So it's actually developing those relationships, nurturing those relationships, and I guess putting Indigenous perspectives on everything that those medical colleges and universities were doing. So I guess they were the lessons that I learned, and they were the real, I guess, they were the sort of things that helped get more Indigenous people into medicine. And as you say, one of the presidents that I had, she was constantly saying, "You can't be what you can't see." So, and it's true in IT. I've had this company for 6 years. I started the company 6 years yesterday, Galunga, and it's really, I started it because I wanted to build a successful IT company, but I wanted to see more Indigenous people coming into IT. And when I looked around at that, there were people going into medicine, into allied health, into nursing, midwifery, law, education, but I couldn't see any people going into IT. So that's hence one of the reasons I started the company.
No, fantastic, Craig. And yeah, I'll circle back around to you in a few questions' time about your company, Galunga, because definitely want to get some insights from you on there. But that's really great and really useful. And I think that, when you draw from your experiences, it is applicable across, various industries. And, I feel like health obviously would be, a good sell to be able to say, this is the impact you're going to have, positive impact you'll be able to have for your communities. And I think, the articulation, obviously, that you described there of, what IT, can do as well for our peoples is a really important part of that messaging. I wanted to circle back to you, Professor Nicholson, if that's okay. You have some specific ideas as to how the IT sector can be engaged to support this year's NAIDOC theme, which is Heal Country. Could you please describe those to us?
So, well, first of all, I do want to acknowledge the people of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung nations where I'm today in Clayton, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and all the other peoples for which we're attending today. So it is interesting around that connection and voice and communication. And one of the things I wanted to just raise as an example of something where we might do better in working together, and also getting those community collaborations, informing some of what we do here in the faculty, and then also connecting it back better to community. So the example I wanted to talk about is how we have had a project in recent years, which was led by Francois Petichon, which some of the people on this call will know as one of our former colleagues recently left us, but it was on looking at using satellite data to map landscape. Now, it was a machine learning and AI project to take all that data that's coming down from the satellite and make it meaningful to look at how land is being used, and how, in particular, how land use is changing, for helping manage the land and looking at impact of climate change. So that's our traditional research Western view of that project. Now, I know that Indigenous community have obviously that deep, long connection with land, understanding of the land, custodianship of the land. So really, when we have these kinds of partnerships, we should be connecting with our Indigenous community partners and bringing them in to talk about those sort of projects and their potential right from the start, because we have that opportunity to bring that knowledge and understanding and tradition and so on into the design of our projects, because it's not just that it's a tech thing that you flick a switch and it's got nothing to do with people. We know, particularly when we're looking at building AI and models for use that people will use, we don't just build AI models to sit there. We build them so that they're used in some way by our society or business or so on, that we have to bring the people into the loop of designing the AI systems and planning ahead for how they'll be used. And so we need to bring that Indigenous perspective into that kind of project. And we also need to, ahead of time, be sharing some of the potential of that technology so that we can get the benefit back to our Indigenous community in the way that's most useful for them. It's not for us to say what that would be, but to have that conversation early on and during to get that shared benefit of whatever our research is. So that's just one example of the kind of thing that we do that we in our faculty might think of as a very interesting but technical problem, versus that broader impact and having that partnership with Indigenous community.
Thank you very much, Professor Nicholson. That's I've never even really thought of it in terms like that within the IT field, that things are designed for usage. It's a really active component to it as opposed to just passively existing. That's a real eye opener for me, I must say.
Can I just add something to that then? Because this came, but why would students think about IT and how they might bring it back to community? But I think this is really important. In fact, we have this challenge for recruiting any students into IT, that they think of it like the IT crowd and people sitting there typing away, or as Jamil said, as a sort of a tech support. But really, when you think about what software does, is it delivers solutions to something, some need, access, knowledge, efficiencies, different ways of looking at things, visualizing. So any part of our community has those needs, society, business. So Indigenous community has that potential. And if we can have the Indigenous students see that they can become the experts that can understand the needs of Indigenous community and can develop the IT solutions that will particularly address those needs, that's the way that they can be contributing back to community as well with that technical side. So whether it's AI models for land use, or whether it's the kind of visualizations of 3D animations that we've seen in the Monash Country Lines archives, capturing Indigenous, storylines and so on. That's technical, but it's a use, and it's around something that is good or wanted by community. So I think that kind of partnership, where we can show that to students through outreach and get them excited by the potential, that's where we should be heading as well.
No, yeah, fantastic. Thanks for adding that, Professor Nicholson. It's really important qualifier there that I think provides a lot of clarity for people who are listening in. Professor Mccamish, if I could please throw to you again. Across your career, your research has included a focus on Australian Indigenous archives and the development of more inclusive archival educational programs that meet the needs of diverse communities. Could you please tell us about that work and the work of some of the Indigenous PhD students with whom you have worked?
Yes. And just to add to Anne's reference to the Monash Country Lines archive, before I do that, it created a library of 3D animations of songline stories and narratives from communities across Australia, and it was a partnership between the Monash Indigenous Centre in the Faculty of Arts and Sensi Lab in the Faculty of Information Technology. And it worked with elders to animate their stories. It was narrated in language. And the overall goal and the drive for it came from the elders in the communities, who said that their young people weren't interested in hearing them tell their stories or in language, and they wanted to find ways to pique their interest. And through these animations, they were hoping that their young people interest would be sparked to listen to the stories and to learn their language. And this is in context where sometimes there are only a handful of speakers left. And it is a wonderful example of a project that supports that cross-generational knowledge transmission and language recovery and sharing with the wider Australian community as well. And I think, to me, the best story that I heard coming out of what it meant was when one of the researchers from Monash Indigenous Centre, Professor John Bradley, was visiting the Yanua community, and one of the elders said, one of the aunties said to him, "John, I want to pick a bone with you about these animations." And he thought, have we not been culturally sensitive enough? Have we not represented the stories and song lines in the way that the elders wanted? And she said, "My grandchildren came to visit me last weekend, and it was great to have them there, but they kept me up to 4 o'clock in the morning watching the animations and asking me questions about them." So I think they're the kinds of stories that connect in with why IT. In my own research, I've partnered with Indigenous organisations and communities, particularly in the archival area, and particularly in developing rights charters in records and archives, which have been created by or about Indigenous peoples, but are largely in non-Indigenous hands. And my most recent work in this rights-based area, which links very closely to human rights issues, relates to Indigenous children who are in care today in far larger numbers than ever, and Indigenous care leavers, including the stolen generations. I've worked with 3 Indigenous PhD students, one who looked deeply into the narratives of Koori people in Victoria, another who was working with the Monash Country Lines Archive project, and another who is looking very deeply into the issue of what does cultural safety mean in libraries and archives, which are often sorry places for Indigenous people, given what the records and documents contain about their history. And part of the strategy relates to recruiting more Indigenous PhD students, because that's the way to grow research in this area and to grow Indigenous academics in this area. And could I just add, a really high priority emerging area, which I think responds very much to what's happening in Australia today, relates to data sovereignty, and the fact that all around the world, First Nations people are claiming data sovereignty. That is, rights to exercise ownership and governance over the data and records and information and knowledge in any format or medium which has been created by them or about them collectively and individually, but is not controlled by them. And you can see that some really wicked educational and research questions arise from that context. What kind of IT governance frameworks, technologies and systems can support Indigenous ownership and governance over their data? Ones that don't carry harmful effects relating to data bias and lack of algorithmic accountability and data profiling, etc. And I think, as Anne said before, because we're a very broad faculty and our education and research spans from the social technical end of the spectrum, it spans the social technical spectrum from social sciences approaches to knowledge management and information management through to the engineering and very high tech stuff. And it has experts in knowledge and information management, as well as business and information systems, multimedia, visualization, computing science, data science, AI, cybersecurity. And that means we have something to offer to work with Indigenous elders, people and communities in Indigenous-led curriculum development and research that really addresses this issue of data sovereignty.
No, fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Professor Mccamish. And data sovereignty obviously been a very hot button conversation for a very long time. So, no, it's a real privilege to sort of hear your thoughts on that topic. Jamil, I just wanted to throw it to you again, if possible, just around the critical student support needs for Indigenous students currently enrolled with Monash and, prospective students. We're talking a lot about, growing, IT, Indigenous student numbers, but, in general, what are some of the critical supports that you think really need to go hand in hand with that?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Sorry about that. I'd just like to acknowledge Professor Mccamish's response. I think that's a really important point that you touched on there, and it sort of my mind goes to the nothing about us without us type saying, and I think that's true of high school teachers as well. I think we need to get better about including or having Aboriginal led responsive content, all that sort of stuff. I think we're going to touch on that next week at the MEA conference a little bit, but yeah, really valid point that you raised there. Obviously, we provide tailored student support services to across all of our Indigenous students, whether it be undergrad, masters, and or bridging programs as well, through things like the Indigenous tutorial assistance scheme, where we'll set all students that express interest up with a tutor to provide them two hours per unit per week with tutorial assistance. I think that'd be a big thing as well. So anyone coming through the IT field, obviously, we'd be encouraging them, like we do all students, to sign up to that service. But I was actually thinking as well of the review of higher education access and outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that was done in 2012 by Professor Larissa Brent, and there's obviously some great recommendations that are put forward in that report that was done obviously a number of years ago now. But one of the big things that has been raised already today, just around increasing Indigenous staff within the faculty, would be a big thing that I would think would help provide a support to prospective or current students if they're enrolled in the faculty. I guess you could say that the pre-work could be done, which is things like the framework, the IT framework are doing. But I think providing that culturally safe space that, increased Indigenous staff representation brings, I think that's really important. So we need to make sure we keep growing there. And then that would lead on to things like mentoring as well. So obviously, as the cohort grew, you could start doing some initiatives like they do in medicine, nursing, health sciences, I think, where you get some older Indigenous students providing some mentorship to the younger ones coming through. And I think that would help. And when you've got that person that I guess understands exactly what you're going through, it just makes that journey a little bit easier. So I think that would be a big thing. And I guess actually, touching on that's sort of really been evident across arts and medicine, nursing, health sciences, and the work that Marta have started up as well, and Professor Brian Martin. So I think if we could see IT doing the same thing, I think would that would be important around support for Indigenous students. And then I guess, like, once you had set those sorts of things up, making sure that they were plugged in with industry opportunities is something that I think would be really important as well. And down the track, when there's further Indigenous representation in organisations, that could have that, I guess, mentorship through people that are through their degree, but then also out in industry doing work. And I think that would be really beneficial to the students and help them through their journey.
Thank you very much, Mel.
I could see, Professor Nicholson's got a question there.
I just wanted to jump in. Sorry, Joseph. I just wanted to say on that industry engagement, and Craig might also say more about that we have in our faculty a very strong, well-established industry-based learning program. And so we already have that opportunity where we have industry partners to provide kind of placements for the Indigenous students we're attracting. But what we're looking at is expanding that, in particular, to try and have some of the Indigenous businesses and organisations join that program to have the Indigenous students be able to do placements if they wish in those community organisations. So given that we have an existing program, sort of kind of tailoring elements of it to suit the particular Indigenous cohort, I think is an example of what's important for us to be doing in that space.
Most definitely, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jamil, and thank you, Professor Nicholson, for adding to that discussion there. Just wanted to throw to Craig now. Craig, you sort of briefly touched on your company, Galunga, just in your earlier answer. And I just wanted to sort of get you to expand on some of the challenges for Indigenous businesses that aspire to become more involved in the industry.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. I guess one of the problems for me was I wanted to get into IT, but I didn't have any experience in it. So one of the challenges for me was to work out what I was going to do with the company. I wanted to build a successful IT company that was sustainable and profitable. I wanted to get more Indigenous people into the company. I came into the company full-time 3 years ago. So it became profitable so that I could actually do that. I do want to get more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people into the company, but my difficulty there is finding people that want to come in and in what roles they can play in the company, whether it's working strictly with IT or whether it's in admin or what it might be. So there's a variety of things in the company. It might be quoting on different tenders that come out through the Digital Transformation Agency and that sort of stuff. But I also, one of the other phases to my vision was to build or to establish an Indigenous IT academy to get more Indigenous people into IT. I still don't know how to do that, and it's still one of the things that I would like to do, but I think there's probably other ways that we can get more Indigenous people into IT. Just picking up on what Anne was saying about AI, we successfully tendered for an automated business processes in one government agency. It's been going for 3 years now. It's a 5-year contract. One of the things that the company would like to do is get more Indigenous people working with them around the AI processes, around automating business processes. And I haven't been able to find anyone to do that. So my challenge there is where are these Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who want to come into IT? And that's where it's good if we can build a relationship, say, with a university like Monash. I've got companies out there that I'm partnering with who really want to see Indigenous people within their companies, whether it's work experience students or whether it's people full-time in their business. So there's a lot of companies out there who've got a lot of goodwill, but I need to find the people that can actually, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that can actually work or want to work in IT. So it's how do I do that? I think one of them is partnering with universities across the country. We need to get into schools, as Jamil was saying. We need to find people in schools or go to, market IT as a career of choice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which we haven't done. As I said earlier, we've done some really good success. Got some really good success in medicine, nursing, midwifery, allied health, law, education. But when it comes to IT, it's a really difficult thing to sell if there's no people working in IT. I think I was one of the first Indigenous IT companies about 5 years ago when we set up. There's a handful of us now, which is great, and we're taking advantage of the Indigenous procurement policy of government. But how do we then take our successes and sort of, how does that translate to the wider Indigenous community? Because it is a good career. There are a lot of things out there that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people can do in IT, and the range is just phenomenal, as you probably all know. And it's how do we market that to young Indigenous kids who might want a career in IT? So I guess one of the challenges is finding people. And I also want to pick up on something else that someone said. It's about supporting Indigenous people once they get into university and providing those safe spaces. But if people are working in IT, how do we provide that cultural support as well within large companies? And that's a conversation that I've had with a few companies. If you want to get people in, how are you going to support them in their journey through IT? So I guess there's some of the challenges that I've had.
No, thank you very much for that. Really important insights there, because considering this is sort of relatively a burgeoning area, and trying to get more of our mob included in the IT space, drawing from people like yourselves' experiences who've sort of been there, done it to a degree. I think it's really useful. I wanted to open up a bit broader now, so that sort of ends the more, I guess, formalised questions. We have had a number of people typing in the Q&A section, so I really appreciate that and keep them coming most definitely. So probably leading off what you just, or following on, sorry, from what you just said, Craig, I'll throw to a question that's probably most relevant to that point, and then we'll have some other questions that are probably more relevant to other points in the discussion from earlier on. But just in the first instance, you know, and this is open to you, Craig, to the whole panel, what are some of the unique skills / backgrounds that Indigenous communities can bring to the IT industry? So the kind of sell, I guess, if you like, to the IT industry.
I guess it's not just, well, from my perspective, it's not just about the IT world. It's about what we as Aboriginal people can bring to, I guess, any field, really. It's not just IT. It's we have unique backgrounds, unique ways of doing things, unique learnings. We all come from we're pretty grounded in our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. So I guess we bring that sort of perspective to the IT world, which I mean to any sort of workplace, I suppose. So it's a lot of it's around that cultural diversity and what we as Aboriginal or Indigenous people can bring to that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Craig. Did any of the other panelists have any thoughts, or am I right to move on to one of the other Q&A? Yep, Professor Nicholson and then Professor Mccamish, or Professor Mccamish, Professor Nicholson.
Oh, all I wanted to say is I do think that the IT industry, in terms of the current workforce, is very diverse in terms of international or ethnic background, but we're still talking non-Indigenous. So I think that the industry does know how to integrate and take advantage of the backgrounds of those people. You can only look at our student cohort and the workforce that we see. You know, many people from backgrounds, you know, particularly Indian in the subcontinent and China and so on. So the industry can bring together, and we do say this to our students, it's international and it's diverse, and it's a benefit. It makes it interesting for people working in the sector, and it adds something to the outcomes of that sector. People are producing software that won't just be, you know, used in one local context, but more broadly, it really helps to have that diversity. But we really haven't taken that understanding of how diverse teams can work in the IT industry and worked out, as Craig has mentioned, how to then bring in the Indigenous contributions and add that to what is already a diverse workforce, but it's sort of just in the non-Indigenous space. So I think that's a big challenge.
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Craig was saying too, in terms of, just as in the case of land management and fire management and addressing climate change, I think Indigenous voices in the IT field are so important. I acknowledge what Anne's saying about diversity, but it's only diverse it might be diverse ethnically, but it's not necessarily diverse. The gender balance is really bad.
Very true.
IT, and so there's not a strong female voice there either. And I think that First Australians and changemaker allies in IT working together might be able to help create essentially even more diverse and more ethical and more equitable industry and field. And in turn, that will feed back into the role that IT can play in relation to First Nations Australians. But as in things like fire management and addressing climate change, it can have an enormously important part for all Australians in this IT world that is dominated by the Googles and the Facebooks and so on. and where none of us actually have much control over our data, and we all need data sovereignty individually and collectively.
Thank you very much, Professor Mccamish. I might move on to another question there, because actually getting a few coming through the chat, which is really wonderful. For people working, and this I think has been partially answered, but I think we could maybe explore it a little further. So for people working in large corporate IT, what would be the best approach for increasing First Nations involvement?
I'll just, first of all, I guess I alluded to this earlier, but we have to increase the workforce, because for starters, so that it's embedded within the workforce, not just being a partnership with community externally. I think that there are two parts to it. I think a lot of companies are working, whatever their sector, with Indigenous community organisations, but embedding the workforce in the IT workforce is a challenge. We don't have the pipeline yet. So if companies are interested, then really helping fund some of our outreach programs to secondary schools, running days or short weeks of come along and try it out to those 14, 15-year-olds and make it seem fun and exciting, and get the industry partners coming and talking to those students, not just us in academia, telling them it's important for industry, but having the examples of the industry people coming and helping with those outreach activities. And then really supporting through funded scholarships to help Indigenous students possibly move to go to university, which is always difficult for any student to make that transition and often move, but particularly if we don't have the strong cohort, and that's where the William Cooper Institute and their programs really help. But even the financial support, so that the students don't have to spend all their time working and can focus on their studies, is really important. And then supporting our IB industry-based learning and internship programs, so that the students are being set up for success when they move into the IT industry, because they understand the sector, because they've tried it out and been supported during their studies. So I think that they're really concrete ways that if we have people, industry partners who want to help us grow that IT workforce and build their own IT workforce and connections to community, can really help in those really practical ways for us on this journey that we're sort of flagging now, that we're really just at the start off.
Thank you very much, Professor. So moving on, and I think this is definitely a question I even hear a lot in my role, and then I imagine sort of the academic or broader sort of level. It's hard sometimes to get into the granularity of it, but a couple of panelists have obviously spoken about for our students. I think it sort of extends beyond that as well, but what safe spaces look like for students. I think that extends to staff, and then obviously we have other culturally diverse people, or people from the LGBTIQ plus community. So this attendee is keen to know, and I think it is an interesting question, to know more about what that actually looks like. So what are the actual practicalities of what a culturally safe space looks like for our mob?
Happy to jump in first instance on that one. I think there's obviously some work that's been done in government around those sorts of things as well in the health space. So if you think of a place like a hospital, how they, I guess, demonstrating the incorporation or the celebration of Indigenous culture in their workplaces. And I know there was a checklist developed by, I think it was probably PwC, IC, their Indigenous consulting arm, that I guess had a few checkpoints that, it's taking it down to a rudimentary sense, but things like Aboriginal artwork on display. Professor Mccamish mentioned it before around naming rooms and places, pardon me, after prominent Aboriginal people or places. I think those are all a good start. Some, an actual designated space, such as we've got, the William Cooper Institute could also work in the Faculty of IT, like medicine have, or through Gukwandruk. So there's those sorts of things that can, play there, an easy sort of win in the first instance, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, Craig. Yeah.
And I think when I was preparing to come on this, I had some thoughts around, it's got to be a genuine commitment, say, from a university to do this. We can't just tick a box or can't pay lip service to it. It's got to be it's got to be led, I think, from my previous experiences from the top, and it has to filter through the organisation, whichever organisation it is. So we can't just pay lip service to these things. We've got to be genuine, because if it isn't genuine, you may as well not do it. So that's probably the only thing that I'd say there.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. No, really powerful point there, and yeah, I think that is something that people need to be aware of as a risk. Is that people often sometimes want to do good, but that we can't fall into that space of tokenism, because it really just sort of negates the purpose. Sorry, Professor Nicholson.
No. I just wanted to add to that. So I do take on board what Craig says, and I really do feel that is, as the leader of the faculty, that it is my responsibility to set that ambition, to make that genuine commitment. But I would also say, in particular to some of my colleagues I know from the faculty who are on the call, that top down only doesn't work. That really we need to get that buy-in from the people on the ground who are doing the research and teaching the students and so on. So I do look on this as a really good opportunity with a number of things that we're starting up, that it's not a matter of waiting for someone else to do it, or even for someone to tell you exactly what's going to happen. We're setting the framework, we're putting things in place, but we're also open to any ideas, and we really want people to jump in and grab it and take it on board and run further with it and bring back different ideas, because that's how we'll really get that genuine progress as well. So this is, I guess, a challenge to my faculty colleagues to look around at what we're already suggesting, hear what Sue and others have said, and then think for yourselves, what would you like to do? What do you think would work in your teaching? How can you make that change happen? And so on. So I want to make it, we want it to be top down, genuine leadership and support and commitment, and then it's getting that buy-in from the whole faculty.
Yes, Professor Mccamish, absolutely. Thank you for that, Professor Nick.
And to add to that, I think then it's for the faculty and the wider university to ensure that there is education available to our staff about what cultural safety really means, and how do you embed values relating to cultural safety in an organisation like a university. And so, for example, in our faculty, we have, as well as, I think what Craig said about lip service, that can often happen in terms of cultural safety with cultural competency training, and everybody goes through one short session of cultural training and you tick the box, yes, our staff are culturally competent, which itself is a problematic concept as well. And I think we need to go deeper, not just for leadership, but as Anne said, for everybody who is engaged with Indigenous communities, curriculum, research, and just across the whole faculty. So we've got a couple of really exciting sort of day-long workshops lined up for our faculty leadership in the first instance. And one of them is about decolonising what we do and decolonising the curriculum. And another one is about racial literacy and recognising that racism needs to be addressed through structural reform. And this is much bigger than our faculty. It's for the whole of Monash and indeed for the whole of academia, but we can play our part in that.
Thank you very much, Professor. Your points there actually probably segue quite nicely into one of the earlier questions we got on the Q&A section, which is around the role of Indigenous teaching practices within the broader teaching programs. I know Professor Nicholson, you spoke about, and Professor Mccamish both spoke about, embedding of Indigenous cultural knowledge, all that kind of stuff. So, what role Indigenous teaching practices might have, but, for example, yarning circles, obviously the concept of a yarning circle has been quite heavily, I think, incorporated by a lot of different industries areas. So might just open that up to the panel.
We're really on the start of this journey, and I think that we're very open to learning what's been done elsewhere and then trying to work out how it fits in particular into our discipline. That's all I was going to say.
No, I think that's definitely a good start. And I think the fact that you are on the start of the journey is probably in some ways a positive, because I mentioned it before, but you know, nothing about us without us. I think that's really important. So sometimes people are really well intentioned around this point, around how they're going to embed or incorporate Indigenous perspectives into the curriculum or teaching, and then could sometimes not turn out that way. It might not be a strength-based approach, or, you know, I've seen horrendous case studies in teaching, and, you know, I think the teacher that did it is, you know, coming from a place that isn't bad, but it turns out really bad. So I think, I believe Pillar 2 is the one that, you know, out of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander framework touches off on this. And going forward, there's going to be community practice-based work that we're going to take forward at the William Cooper Institute, which will obviously invite everyone across the university to be a part of, so that their teaching can be more inclusive. But obviously Professor Brian Martin's done some amazing work in MARTA around decolonising the curriculum with colleagues that he's got. So there's, I think, you know, some great work that's happening in the space. But yeah, we've just got to be a little bit careful not to put the cart before the horse, and make sure that things are done in the right way with relation to that exact question.
And I'll just add, I saw that that question came from one of the members of our Flex team, who provide support to, you know, through Ed Designer and other things to our academics. And one of the things that did strike me is that possibly we need to think a bit more about some of the methods that are used in our industry, and how they may have some similarities and differences from sort of traditional Indigenous practices. And one thing I'm just thinking, I'll be very concrete. There's something called an agile approach to software development. And people use the word agile in the whole of community. I think Malcolm Turnbull got us all going on that. But the idea is that you don't necessarily just like plan something out in detail at the start and then go through and do all the stages until the end. That doesn't work, that things change and you have to get feedback, and you have to adapt to whatever the things are along the way. Well, I suspect that that might be something that's a very natural approach to doing things within Indigenous communities, but I have no idea, you know, because I'm not very far on my personal journey. But that might be something, or a stand-up meeting as part of the programming sort of approach, which is at the start of every day, you just check in with people and touch where they're up to, and say, I need to catch up with you later. And some sort of, I know I'm not saying that's like a yarning circle or anything, but it's a kind of in the programming sector, it's a way of kind of touching in, getting, connecting with people, keeping everyone, you know, talking and communicating. Well, what might be a version of that might actually incorporate other kinds of natural communication that Indigenous community have found useful for millennium. So I'm just throwing that out there, partly to my technical colleagues on the call, because I think that we have to look at what we do and be open to changing them, and be open to adapting them, and to take into account those perspectives.
Could I add to that, to extend it into research as well, because there's the issue. I've just got a book here. I don't know if you can see it. It's probably, no, it's all blurry, but it's about decolonising research, and it's about Indigenous story work as methodology. And I think there are growing, there's a lot more now available about Indigenous research methodologies. One of my PhD students has taken yarning not just as a technique, if you like, but as a methodology, the one who is looking into cultural safety. And it's very, very exciting work. And her work, I think, will contribute to the development of this yarning methodology, which already exists in research in this area. So I think it's really important to think about how we incorporate methodologies that we don't use at the moment into things like developing what are the requirements for systems and technologies and so on, and how do you elicit those technologies. And when you're doing co-design, it's quite different from working with users. you've labelled people as users rather than as agents in what's happening. And some of these kinds of research methodologies really lend themselves to rich data outcomes in relation to research and link to those teaching practices as well.
Thank you very much, Professor Mccamish. Just for one of our attendees asked the question, what actually is a yarning circle? It's a very fair question. Look, the way I would describe it is just a bit of a free-form dialogue format. So, yeah, it can be utilised for different purposes. In one instance, it may be to sort of fulfil a particular agenda, so to garner information, so similar to what, I guess you'd consider a human-centered design session. But a lot of times it is just a, free market to exchange ideas. And it will usually centre around a specific topic, but not always. Sometimes it's about going out and talking to communities without a specific agenda and applying your, technical knowledges to the conversation as to what you can maybe extrapolate and apply to your field of expertise, all the while maintaining transparency with participants as to where information is going, how it's being used, and what insights are actually garnered from that conversation. So if any of the panelists have anything to add about what a yarning circle is, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I might roll on to we've got a few questions coming in. One of the questions, I might combine two of the questions. They were really around, can we learn from other faculties that are sort of, I think, a bit further along the process? And, following that same train of thought, can we also learn from other universities around how we best approach this?
I'm certainly very open to that. And I know, Jamil, you can speak at the institute level, but what I would say is that we as academics, our whole approach is supposed to be to look at what has already been done, to look at the evidence, to look at the literature, or to find out from whatever sources are available what is best practice and where the gaps still are, and then build on that. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to go down pathways that other people have already shown don't work. So I would say that we're very open to working with any organisation, including other universities, and partner with them and learn from them, because that's really what we should be doing in all of our endeavours, and particularly in this one where we don't want to. We want to make that progress as fast as we can. So we want to use the best practice and build on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great response by Professor Nicholson. But in terms of Monash, I think the one that sticks out in my mind is probably medicine, nursing, health sciences. And obviously, always we've had a reputation for doing great work and had great, presence from MISC, the Monash Indigenous Studies Centre. But probably up until 2015, before Professor Karen Adams came on board in the Gukwandaruk unit, there wasn't a great, we're probably a little bit behind, truthfully, in where our enrolments should have been. And there was probably not a space in the medicine, nursing, health science faculty for Indigenous students. And all these sorts of things. I think with her appointment and the work and the team that she's got around her, and the numbers speak for themselves, and I guess the presence speaks for itself around the impact that unit's had and her leadership's had in that time. So I think they're probably the strongest percentage growth in student numbers during that time. But also, if you go to medicine, nursing, health sciences, the key building there at the Clayton campus, you can see there's a real physical representation of Aboriginal culture there. Just as you go in, on your left, there's a lounge. It's a culturally safe space now. They've been sort of leading a lot of the inclusive admissions work that we've sort of adopted more broadly now. So I think that's probably a great example. That started with some Indigenous appointments within the faculty there, which obviously faculty of IT are hoping to do as well. So that would be one. And obviously in recent times, I started in 2018, and just before me, Professor Brian Martin started in MARTA, and I think some great work's been done there. And you can see that the numbers of students that we're starting to attract in that faculty have been growing, and even at the PhD level, there's some really positive momentum under his leadership there. So they're two that probably stick out to me. And there's great work that's happening in IT as well. Sue talking about the strategy before, I think that's really positive. And so I don't think it'll be long till we start to see some of that materialise into higher student enrolments and those sorts of things there. But more broadly, that review that I was talking about before, done by Professor Larissa Brent, there's some great recommendations in there, as to what best practice looks like and what, I guess how universities can become more inclusive and, grow their numbers and their presence, and adopting as many of those recommendations as possible, I think would be a key thing for the faculty. And we've already started to do that, obviously, because it's a number of years old, but there's examples of best practice that are out there, and that references them, that review.
Fantastic, Jamil and Professor Nicholson, thank you very much. Just as a sort of, there's more of a housekeeping question, we had a request come through in the chat just around being able to circulate the PwC checklist that you referred to, Jamil, and we could definitely arrange to do that post this event. Moving forward now, imagine, within information technology, the applications are, relatively speaking, endless. It's just about sort of committing enough time, I guess, to troubleshoot and work on, solutions. So we had a query come through from one of our attendees about its potential use in cultural and political communication between rural and remote Indigenous communities with city-based people. And I think, and for whoever asked that question, forgive me if I'm wrong, I'd add sort of a caveat to that, which is sometimes there can be seen, I think, most definitely within the public sphere, that there's a disconnect between, perhaps what sometimes our more metropolitan-based communities are advocating for, and then what some of the issues facing our, regional, rural, remote communities are facing. So I guess that's really a question around, communication. Can it be used to, help create that solidification of the political agenda of our mobs, given we are multiple mobs trying to come together to sort of, have, I guess, the core focus. I'll open that up to the panel.
One thing I would say, and I'll probably pass to Craig mostly for this, but in general, I think we've seen that IT and social media in some ways forms great or supports communication of communities, but the nature of those communities can be a little bit problematic in that it can actually create bubbles and smaller, more isolated communities when we might want to break down barriers and have broader communication and understanding. So this might be sort of an example of our current, IT now, everyone would know how to set up sort of a private Facebook group or something, but if it's only the people that you invite in, that the ones that you're already in your, more comfort zone with, rather than that reaching out, it's a bit harder to see how the way social media is used now can break down those barriers rather than creating them. So Craig, I don't know if you want to talk more particularly from your knowledge of what you've seen in this space.
Thanks, Anne. I'm not actually really sure how to answer that question. There is a real role for IT to play in communication with people in rural and remote areas. I mean, we've seen a lot of developments in rural and remote medicine, telehealth, that type of thing, and I think those are really good things that we can do for Indigenous communities to get that sort of technology out there. I know there were some things in relation to dentistry. We could do some more things like that in terms of IT and dental work, or dental what do you call it? Not identification, but can't remember the right word, but in rural and remote areas where you can do those things to minimise people coming into a large regional centre. So there's a lot of those things, I think, that would assist or benefit Indigenous communities in rural and remote areas. I think the main application I would see is around health and different IT tools to help deliver health to regional remote people in rural and remote areas. So I guess that's one thing that I've seen in the past. I'm not too sure other things. I was trying to work with some remote Aboriginal medical services a few years back in terms of artificial intelligence or automated business processes whereby people could pool their resources and have automated business process around invoicing or things like that, rather than having one person in each, or a couple of people in each place doing that which would then free people up to do other things. So you can look at automating business processes in rural, around sort of hubs, if you like, different like organisations like Indigenous health services, doing those types of things, so it frees people up to do other things. So I guess they're just some of the things that I've seen in my in the last few years.
I just want to add to what I said before, though. One of the things I think is a bit of a problem with the use of sort of discussion forums and groups where it's mostly typing text, because I think that that's a very poor medium for sharing, actual intent. I think it's hard to get to know people genuinely when all you do is see their postings, and I think that it can inflame people or people misinterpret. So I think there's also an opportunity, as we have stronger infrastructure around better bandwidth of getting access to information and sharing in more remote communities, and whether that's better satellites and so on, to allow people to participate in groups and discussions with people elsewhere, and breaking down those boundaries, for example, between remote, rural and city, where people can actually see relatively high quality video streams like we're doing now, because there's a big difference in hearing the voice and seeing the person when you're getting to know them, compared with just seeing someone posting on a discussion forum. So I think that that's a potential that we'll see more of, as the NBN's kind of rolled out now, and we'll probably see better things in terms of bandwidth access that we need to deliver the kind of more advanced IT solutions to people equitably across Australia. We need to, the telehealth needs to be out, the doctor needs to be able to see the patient, not just speak to them or type to them, and things like that.
In my own area, I think there's great potential in relation to what I mentioned before, which is that a lot of Indigenous knowledge, information, data is in the hands of non-Indigenous organisations. And in particular, if we look at our libraries and archives, much of that has essentially been stolen from communities and is still held in those repositories with no, and although those institutions are reaching out to Indigenous communities, there's still not a lot of control or access to that material for people in communities, particularly remote communities. And one of the things that those institutions and our field generally is looking at is, in the absence of a willingness on the part of institutions to actually return records and archives to communities, to have what we call digital repatriation of those materials and those records. So I think that's another example of how technology can address a pressing problem of access to materials that are used by research and all sorts of researchers and all sorts of other peoples, but are not necessarily accessible to the people who created them in the first place.
Thank you for that, Sue, as well. I mean, I missed the start of the question, but presume it's around the connection between Aboriginal people and technology. And I think one great example, and Joe will be able to talk to this as well, is for us as Yorta people, like we've actually got an app now that that like has the language and the translation for each of the word, and that's I think really it's gained a lot of popularity amongst our community members, because it's a really accessible way to learn some more words and phrases, and that's going to be critical, I guess, again, the next generation in particular, that obviously got a lot of interaction with their ICT, their devices and stuff, to make sure that language is preserved and continues to grow. So I think that's been a really great example. I know that there's other mobs across Victoria that have done the same, and I presumably across Australia. So that's a great interconnection between community and technology, I think. And Sue mentioned the work that are done around the country lines archives stuff earlier, but yeah, that's something that's been local to us, which has been exciting.
Thank you all very much for your insights there. That was a real rich discussion, I think, around that topic. We do have one final question in the Q&A, and then I think I'll throw it to all our panellists to provide sort of wrap-up thought. This question's been partially answered, but the positive or particular IT trends or areas that could have positive impacts for Indigenous communities. So, Jamil, you've mentioned the revitalisation of culture via the app process. Professor Mccamish has been talking about that sort of digital repatriation. Are there any more thoughts on that particular question?
I think I saw an earlier question that related to gaming. And one of the things that I know the people who are involved in the Monash Country Lines archive were thinking about and talking with community about, where there's a lot of potential, I think, in that regard, is that those 3D animations could be translated into simulations, and that makes them available to in terms of games. And I think that if you're thinking about young people and attracting young people into IT, the thought of then being able to work with and interact with those 3D animations, and obviously there's a lot of challenges in relation to how to do that in culturally sensitive ways and with leadership from communities who have whose stories are in those animations. But that's another area that I think could be quite exciting, and certainly goes to that issue of why would young people want to get involved in this area.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Mccamish. It's such an important point there around making it sort of relevant for younger populations as well as to how they can engage. Were there any other thoughts on that question before we just head into our final thoughts? Okay, fantastic. Well, look, Jacinda usually wraps these events up with the questions of our panelists as to, if they could recommend a book, what would it be, that kind of thing. I might broaden it a little bit. If you want to do a book, that's totally fine. But we might just go around the panelists, if that's okay, starting with Professor Mccamish, Jamil, then Craig, then Professor Nicholson, just to sort of, point to any resources that, have, I guess, been inspiration for you or relevant to the discussion today, that you might think people would get something out of.
Me first, is it? So I mentioned before the poetry of Amberlyn Kawa Malina, and there's a book of her poetry which is called Living on Stolen Land, and it's addressed to I guess hopefully the people who want to be allies and work and walk together with Indigenous people. And I just find this so inspiring. And I might just read a little bit out of her last poem in the book called Futures. And it says, "What is to come, all the things that are next, lives within the hearts, minds, hopes of Indigenous peoples and of settlers who are committed to justice. Decolonised futures are what we create together." So I'd thoroughly recommend. It's only it's not a long read, but it's a deep read, and it just distills so many issues for us who are living on stolen land.
Thank you very much, Professor Mccamish. Really important document there, and I think a lot of people will probably take your advice on that and go have a look. Jamil, if you could.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I guess not particularly specific to IT or the discussion we've had today necessarily, but I would recommend Thinking Black by Bain Atwood and Andrew Marcus. It's an older book. It's probably 2004 now, I think, but it's basically a book that contains letters from Uncle William Cooper and our grandfather, our great-grandfather, Shadrach Livingston James, just around their advocacy work for community, and I guess you could see the passion that came through in those letters and the struggles of the day. And unfortunately, there's been some traction, but not a lot in the almost 100 years or so since a lot of those letters were written. So I guess it just highlights the time is now. We need to make positive change. This is why we've got these types of things happening, and it's really positive that there's such buy-in from non-Indigenous people here today. Obviously, you all signed in, and we've heard from Sue and Anne, who aren't Indigenous, but they're obviously really passionate about growing the agenda in the Faculty of IT, which is exciting. But yeah, check that book out because I think it's a good context, and also given that we're William Cooper Institute, to see what sort of a man he was and such an activist. So yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Jamil, and yeah, as I said, really great connection there at the Institute. Craig, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I don't really have a book in mind. I was a bit unprepared for that, but I guess what I'd like to do is wish Monash well on this journey that you've just started, that you're undertaking. But I wouldn't be perturbed, or I wouldn't feel as if you're not going to get there. We graduated our first Indigenous doctor in the early 80s, and I mean, look at how many Indigenous doctors we've got now. We've got Indigenous doctors in a lot of the specialist programs now, and children of Indigenous doctors are now studying medicine and becoming doctors. So, and that's also in allied health, Aboriginal health work, nursing, midwifery, all of those things. So I guess from little things, big things grow, and I think making a start's a great thing, and hopefully I can be there to provide any advice that I can on your journey from here on in. So congratulations on what you're doing. I think it's a great initiative, and I guess I just wish you all the luck in the future.
Thank you very much, Craig. Yeah, and I didn't mean to just bring that on you about the book or the resources, but yeah, really important final thought there. And yeah, no doubt we'll take you up on that offer moving forward. Professor Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Yeah, we definitely will be trying to take you up on that one. Two things. Well, I don't have a particular book, but what I would like to share, I guess, with my colleagues in the faculty in particular is that, I've been on a bit of a, learning journey myself in the last 3 years. There's a lot of things that we hear about now in the media around books and discussion and culture. So, I myself have read some Henry Reynolds and Dark Emu and a few other bits and pieces, but I don't want to recommend any one of them. What I would say is that I've taken it upon myself when I read an article like that to actually go and try and read the book or read the source, like read the Uluru Statement of the Heart, read some of the report on the stolen generations, because we're all busy. We all have a lot of things to do, but if we genuinely want to be on this journey, we have to educate ourselves first, and then we can bring that understanding. I think it's what Sue said. It's not just the 4 hours of the cultural safety training, but it's that understanding. And further, I found that when I have spoken to Indigenous colleagues or community members that about them as people, they're very generous in sharing their story and their background, and that we can learn personally that how their journey has been, and that we need that to inform our own particular journey and what we're trying to do here in the faculty. So we are ambitious in our faculty. As I've said, we're at the start of our journey. We've got a great framework, which we're looking to support the Monash framework, that we've got our faculty framework. We're going to invest in it. We're going to get on and do these things. So I'd encourage everyone to do their own personal journey and to come on board with the faculty and help us get to where we want to go. So, and I'd like to thank the panelists, Jamil, Craig, for joining us and providing that really valuable perspectives. What William Cooper Institute and is doing under Jacinta's leadership and with Jamil and other colleagues is really important. We need to be working with partners outside the university, in industry, and learning from the different community organisations that will want to work with us and help us on our journey. So we really appreciate that. Everyone just come on board. Let us get there. And thank you also, just Joseph, for doing such a great job as a moderator and guiding the panel today. Sorry, we've gone a little bit over time, but lots of really fantastic conversations, I think. Thanks to everyone who's attended. Thanks for the questions in the chat, and we look forward to progressing on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nicholson. Jamil, did you have something to add, did you, or you had your hand raised?
No, I was just waving goodbye to anyone that might have signed off, but
right. So yeah,
that was a good summary.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for attending.
Thanks, everyone.